This is a screenshot video on the topics of the parole evidence rule and interpretation, misspelled by the way. I'll take credit for that. I don't know how I got that one through spell check. Good job. Interpretation of contract language. I have a separate screenshot video and a separate link regarding statute of frauds. So in this video, I'm going to skip through the statute of frauds. What I did say, however, at the end of the presentation on the statute of frauds in that screenshot video, that we're going to have contracts in writing even if they're not in the categories of the contracts covered by the statute of frauds, for any number of reasons, including it just makes sense sometimes to put a contract in writing, which sets the stage then for talking about parole evidence and the parole evidence rule. It's actually a rule of evidence, but traditionally it's tucked into a presentation of contract law rather than presented as part of an evidence course. And so here it is. And the parole evidence rule, as I note here, states if the parties to a written contract intended that that contract in writing is the complete and final version of their agreement, the parole evidence rule provides that a party to the contract cannot then introduce in court evidence of any oral agreement or promise made before the contract's formation or at the time the contract was created. And I give you an example where if we have a case where there's a written agreement which was complete in all terms, provided for the payment of rent at the end of the year, an attempt to establish by parole evidence outside the written agreement that it was agreed that rent was to be payable in advance wasn't admissible. It seems to me that the purpose of the parole evidence rule is kind of self-evident. It, if you will, justifies or if you will supports the integrity of the written contract. And so if you and I enter into a comprehensive written contract that sets forth all of the terms and conditions of our agreement, neither one of us have to be worried that at a later date one of us is going to claim that the contract included new promises or promises in contradiction of those set forth in writing. And really that's all I want to say about the parole evidence rule. I think if you ever get involved in contract litigation, whether it be commercial contracts or I know what I do, some of labor contracts in the form of collective bargaining agreements, from time to time you're going to encounter the parole evidence rule. The final thing I want to say about the parole evidence rule, which then launches us into the next item of interpretation of contracts, is that parole evidence, that is evidence outside the written agreement, will always be admissible if the purpose is to clarify the meaning of language already in the written contract. Again, it being parole evidence will always be admissible if the purpose of the evidence is to clarify the meaning of written terms in the contract. And that gets us into interpretation of contracts. And I make, I think, the very obvious point that sometimes language in a contract is ambiguous, simply that its meaning is less than clear, and the court or in the material I do, a labor arbitrator might be called on to interpret the ambiguous language. And I have a case for you to read that's already up on Brightspace. I always mispronounce this. Frigalomet Importing Company versus BNS International Sales Corporation. And the parties had a comprehensive written agreement, but the question was the meaning of one term in the agreement, namely chicken. If you read the case, or when you read the case, please do, because you're going to need to answer the next quiz question, you'll see that the court begins its written decision saying something like, the issue in this case is, what is the meaning of chicken, as it was used, of course, by the parties to the contract. And you notice, since the parties were arguing over the meaning of that which was in the written contract, parole evidence outside the agreement was certainly admissible in an attempt to clarify its meaning. So when we look at that case, we notice that the parties didn't set forth a definition of chicken in their contract, and so the parties sought to use parole evidence outside the written agreement in an attempt to persuade the court what chicken meant. And what we see is different categories of parole evidence used to clarify the ambiguity. One is past practice. Oftentimes parties have done business in the past where a practice may have developed as to the meaning of a written term. In this case, they hadn't. Also, trade practices. Is there a contract that reflects some kind of a trade, in this case, import, export of chicken? And is there a commonly understood term in the trade that can be used? And the court found that there was no past practice and the trade practice was not clear. And the court then said that the person who sued, which was the buyer, didn't satisfy the burden of proof. And what you'll see in the court decision, and I want to emphasize this, though it's not in my notes, but it's now in this video, if these categories like past practice and trade usage aren't, and if there's no definition in the written contract itself, aren't really leading the court or the arbitrator to a clear conclusion, what the court's going to do and what the arbitrator is going to do is pick out what is the fairest and most reasonable term. And I think if you look at the definition of, if you look at the case at different points, the court says if the buyer who sued was to prevail, the seller would not have made a profit, and it's pretty hard to think that an experienced business would enter into a contract knowing that, at least for a significant part of the contract, they would be losing money. Okay, this will end this screenshot video.